He took in a rejected bride at the bus stop. What this poor farmer did next shocked everyone. The rain fell hard on the empty country road as Thomas Brown drove his old truck home from the market. Thomas was a simple farmer who had lived alone for 15 years since his wife Mary had passed away. His small farm barely made enough money to survive, but he worked hard every day with his rough, weathered hands. Through the heavy rain, Thomas spotted a young woman sitting alone at the bus stop. She wore a white dress that was now completely wet. A small suitcase sat beside her, and even from his truck he could tell she was crying. Thomas was not the type of man who got involved in other people's problems. The people in town knew him as quiet and keeping to himself. But something about the sadness of this woman made him slow down his truck and then stop completely. "Hello there," he called through the window. "The next bus won't come until tomorrow morning. Do you need a place to stay tonight?" The woman looked up with red, puffy eyes. Her makeup was running down her face. She seemed afraid and unsure. "I don't know where to go," she said in a soft voice that Thomas could barely hear over the rain. Thomas opened the passenger door of his truck. "I'm Thomas. I have a spare room at my farm just down the road. It's warm and dry. You're welcome to stay until the morning bus comes." The woman looked at his kind eyes for a long moment. She seemed to be thinking hard about what to do. Finally, she picked up her small suitcase. "I'm Dorothy," she said, as she climbed into his truck. "Thank you for stopping. Not many people would help a stranger these days." As Thomas drove the short distance to his farm, Dorothy looked out the window without speaking. He didn't push her to talk. He understood that sometimes people needed quiet time with their thoughts. His farmhouse came into view, small and simple, but well kept. The rain was still coming down hard as Thomas parked his truck. "It's not much," he said as he opened the front door for her. "But it's home." Dorothy stepped inside and looked around at the clean but plain living room. There were no fancy things, just basic furniture that had been well used over many years. A few old pictures hung on the walls. "It's lovely," she said, and Thomas could tell she meant it. Thomas showed her to the spare bedroom that had once belonged to his son, who now lived in the city and rarely visited. He found her a dry towel and some of his late wife's clothes that might fit her. "You can change into these dry clothes," he said, placing them on the bed. "I'll make us some hot tea." While Dorothy changed, Thomas went to the kitchen and put the kettle on the stove. He wondered about her story. Why was a woman in a white dress sitting alone at a bus stop in the rain? But he wouldn't ask. If she wanted to tell him, she would. Dorothy came into the kitchen wearing his wife's old blue dress. It was a bit big for her, but it was dry and warm. Thomas gave her a hot cup of tea and they sat at the kitchen table. "I was supposed to get married today," Dorothy said suddenly, looking down at her cup. "But when I got to the church, Jack wasn't there. He left a note with the priest saying he couldn't go through with it." Thomas nodded slowly, not knowing what to say. He was not good with words of comfort. "Everyone was there," Dorothy continued, a tear rolling down her cheek. "My family, my friends, his family. Everyone saw me get left at the altar. I couldn't face them. So I just ran. I took a bus as far as I could, then I had to change buses. And that's when you found me." Thomas reached across the table and gently patted her hand. "Sometimes the worst days of our lives lead us to better places," he said. "You can stay here as long as you need to figure things out." Dorothy looked up at him with grateful eyes. "Why would you help someone you don't even know?" Thomas smiled slightly. "Because everyone deserves kindness, especially on their hardest days." Part 2. A week passed and Dorothy was still at Thomas's farm. She had called her parents to let them know she was safe, but wouldn't tell them where she was staying. She needed time to think, she told them. Dorothy began to help around the farmhouse. She wasn't used to farm life. She had grown up in town where her father worked in an office. But she was eager to learn. Each morning she woke up early and made breakfast, before Thomas went out to work in the fields. "You don't have to cook for me," Thomas told her on the third day. "I want to help," Dorothy replied. "You've been so kind to me. Besides, it gives me something to do besides think about Jack." Soon, Dorothy was feeding the chickens and collecting eggs. Thomas showed her how to pick vegetables from the garden without damaging the plants. She was clumsy at first, but she improved quickly. One afternoon, Thomas found Dorothy sitting on the porch steps, looking at a small photo in her hands. It was a picture of her and Jack. "Do you think there's something wrong with me?" she asked, without looking up. "Why would he leave like that?" Thomas sat down beside her. "Sometimes people are afraid of good things," he said. "It says more about him than about you." Dorothy put the photo away. "Tell me about your wife," she said. "There are pictures of her all over the house." Thomas smiled sadly. "Mary was the love of my life. We met when we were just 16. She loved this farm almost as much as I did. We had 30 good years together before cancer took her." "I'm sorry," Dorothy said. "Do you get lonely here by yourself?" Thomas looked out across his fields. "Yes," he admitted, "but the work keeps me busy." That evening, Dorothy made a special dinner with vegetables from the garden. As they ate, Thomas noticed how different the house felt with her there. It was warmer somehow, less empty. "I should start looking for a job," Dorothy said. "I can't stay here forever." Thomas nodded, but the thought of her leaving made him feel sad. He had gotten used to having her around. The next day, Dorothy walked to the small store down the road to buy some bread. When she returned, she was excited. "Mrs. Wilson at the store says they need help there 3 days a week," she told Thomas. "I can start tomorrow." Thomas felt happy for her, but also worried. Would she leave now that she had a job? "That's wonderful news," he said. Will you still stay here? At least until you find a place of your own?" Dorothy smiled. "If that's okay with you, I'm not ready to go back to town yet." As days turned into weeks, Dorothy and Thomas fell into a comfortable routine. She worked at the store 3 days a week while Thomas worked on the farm. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk, or just enjoy the quiet together. One Sunday, Dorothy's parents called. They had been trying to convince her to come home. "They want me to give Jack another chance," Dorothy told Thomas after the call. "He's been asking about me, says he made a mistake." Thomas felt his heart sink, but he tried not to show it. "What do you want to do?" Dorothy was quiet for a long time. "I don't know," she finally said. "A month ago, I thought I wanted to marry Jack. Now I'm not so sure." That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He had grown fond of Dorothy, more than fond if he was honest with himself. But she was young, with her whole life ahead of her. He was just a poor farmer with gray in his hair and lines on his face. In the morning, Dorothy found Thomas already up and making breakfast. "I've been thinking," she said. "I'd like to stay here a bit longer if that's all right. I'm not ready to face Jack or my parents yet." Thomas tried to hide his relief. "You can stay, as long as you need," he said. "This place feels more like a home with you in it." Dorothy smiled, and Thomas felt something warm grow in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Part 3. The summer days grew warmer, and the farm started to change. Dorothy had planted flowers along the path to the house, adding splashes of color to the simple farm. She had also started a small vegetable stand at the end of the driveway, selling extra produce from Thomas's garden. "We can make a bit more money this way," she explained to Thomas. "People driving by like to buy fresh vegetables." Thomas was impressed by her business sense. The vegetable stand was doing well, and Dorothy kept careful track of the money they made. She put most of it in a jar in the kitchen, labeled Farm Improvements. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Dorothy asked, "What would you think about fixing up the old barn? We could hold small markets there in the fall." Thomas looked at her with surprise. "We?" Dorothy blushed. I'm sorry. It's your farm. I shouldn't make plans." No, Thomas said quickly. "I like your ideas. I wasn't sure how long you planned to stay." Dorothy looked down at her hands. "I don't know. I like it here. I like the quiet and the work. She paused. "I like spending time with you." Thomas felt his heart beat faster, but before he could respond, they heard a car coming up the driveway. It was a shiny black car that looked out of place at the farm. Dorothy stood up suddenly. "That's Jack's car," she whispered. A tall, well-dressed man got out of the car. He was handsome in a clean-cut way with perfectly combed hair and an expensive watch. "Dorothy," Jack called, walking toward the porch. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Thomas felt something cold settle in his stomach. Jack looked like the kind of man who could give Dorothy everything Thomas couldn't. Nice clothes, a big house, fancy dinners. Dorothy stood very still as Jack came up the steps. "Your parents finally told me where you were," Jack said. "I've been so worried. Why didn't you answer my calls?" "You left me at the church, Jack," Dorothy said quietly. "In front of everyone." Jack had the good sense to look ashamed. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I got scared. But I've missed you every day. Please come home with me." Thomas stood up. "I'll give you two some privacy," he said, turning to go inside. "No," Dorothy said, reaching for his arm. "Please stay, Thomas." Jack looked between them, his eyes narrowing. "Who is this guy?" "Dorothy, what's going on here?" "Thomas is a friend who helped me when I needed it most," Dorothy said firmly. "Something you didn't do." Jack's face grew red. "So what? You're living with this farmer now. Look at this place. It's nothing compared to what I can give you." Thomas felt shame wash over him. Jack was right. His farm was small and simple, but Dorothy stepped forward, her eyes flashing with anger. "This place has something your big house doesn't, Jack. It has heart. Thomas works hard every day. He cares about growing good food and being kind to people. He helped a stranger in the rain without wanting anything in return." Jack looked stunned. "You can't be serious. You're choosing this over me? Over the life we planned?" Dorothy took a deep breath. "The life you planned, Jack. You never asked what I wanted. Thomas listens to me. He values my ideas." Jack shook his head. "You'll regret this. When the charm of playing farmer wears off, you'll miss the good life." "I think you should go now," Thomas said quietly but firmly. After Jack drove away, Dorothy and Thomas sat in silence for a long time. "Did you mean what you said?" Thomas finally asked. Dorothy nodded. "Every word. Jack never saw the real me. Here, I feel like I can be myself." Thomas reached for her hand. "I'm glad you stayed." Dorothy smiled. "Me too. Now about that barn." Part. 4 autumn arrived, bringing cooler days and colorful leaves. The barn renovation project was nearly complete. Thomas and Dorothy had worked side by side for weeks, repairing the old wooden structure. They had painted it a bright red with white trim, and inside they had built simple stalls for vendors. The whole town was talking about the upcoming harvest market at Brown Farm. Dorothy had put up posters at the store where she worked, and she had invited other local farmers and craftspeople to sell their goods. "Do you think anyone will come?" Thomas asked as they hung strings of lights across the barn ceiling. "They'll come," Dorothy said confidently. "People are excited about something new in town." Mrs. Wilson from the store had become a good friend to Dorothy. One afternoon she stopped by to see the barn. "My goodness, what a change," she exclaimed. "Thomas Brown, I've known you for 20 years, and I've never seen you take on a project like this." Thomas smiled shyly. It was Dorothy's idea. Mrs. Wilson looked between them with knowing eyes. "Well, Dorothy has been good for you and good for this farm." After Mrs. Wilson left, Dorothy and Thomas sat on a hay bale in the barn, admiring their work. "Thank you for believing in my idea," Dorothy said. "Not many people would have listened to me." Thomas looked at her. In the months since she had arrived at his farm, Dorothy had changed. She stood taller, spoke with more confidence, and smiled more often. The sad girl from the bus stop was gone. "Your ideas are good," Thomas said simply. "You see things I don't see. Possibilities I missed." Dorothy leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence. The day of the harvest market arrived. Thomas woke up early, feeling nervous. What if no one came? What if they had done all this work for nothing? He went to the kitchen and found Dorothy already up making coffee. She wore a pretty blue dress and had tied her hair back with a ribbon. "Today's the big day," she said, smiling. They worked together all morning, setting up their vegetable stand in the barn and helping the other vendors arrange their tables. By noon, everything was ready. "Now we wait," Thomas said, checking his watch. They didn't have to wait long. The first car arrived 15 minutes before the market was supposed to open. Then another car came, and another. Soon, the field Thomas had cleared for parking was filling up. "I told you they would come," Dorothy whispered, squeezing his hand. The harvest market was a huge success. People from town and even from neighboring towns came to buy fresh vegetables, homemade bread, jams, crafts, and more. Children played in the pumpkin patch that Thomas and Dorothy had planted in the spring. The air was filled with laughter and conversation. In the afternoon, Jack arrived with a woman on his arm. Dorothy was helping a customer when she spotted him. She felt her heart beat faster, but not from love or longing. She was surprised to find she felt nothing for him now. Jack made his way through the crowd toward her. "Dorothy," he said, looking around at the busy market. "This is kind of impressive." "Thank you," she said politely. "Are you enjoying the market?" Jack nodded. "I have to admit, I didn't think you were serious about staying here. But you seem happy." "I am happy," Dorothy said, and she meant it. Across the barn, Thomas watched them talking. He felt a moment of worry. Would seeing Jack again change Dorothy's mind about staying? But then Dorothy looked up and caught Thomas's eye. She smiled at him, a warm, loving smile that made his worry fade away. She excused herself from Jack and walked over to Thomas. "Everything okay?" Thomas asked. Dorothy took his hand. "Everything is perfect." Part 5 winter came to the farm, bringing snow and quiet days. The last harvest market of the year had been held 2 weeks ago, and now the barn stood empty until spring. But the farm itself was full of life and warmth. Thomas and Dorothy sat by the fireplace in the living room, planning next year's crops. The farm had made more money this year than it had in the past 10 years combined, thanks to the markets and Dorothy's clever ideas. "We should add strawberries next spring," Dorothy said, making notes in her book. "And maybe keep bees for honey." Thomas watched her as she worked, her face glowing in the firelight. He could hardly remember what his life had been like before she came. The lonely days and quiet meals seemed like a bad dream now. "Dorothy," he said suddenly, "I've been thinking about something." She looked up from her notes. "What is it?" Thomas took a deep breath. "The farm is doing well now, better than ever before, and I know you've put money aside from your job at the store." Dorothy nodded, wondering where this was going. "I thought maybe you might want to buy a place of your own soon," Thomas continued, his voice shaking slightly. "You've learned so much about farming. You could start your own small farm if you wanted to." Dorothy put down her pen. "Is that what you want? For me to leave?" "No," Thomas said quickly. "That's not what I want at all. I don't want you to feel stuck here, with me. I know I'm older, and this is just a simple farm." Dorothy moved to sit beside him on the sofa. "Thomas Brown," she said firmly, "I am exactly where I want to be." Thomas looked at her hopefully. "Really?" Dorothy took his hand. "When you found me at that bus stop, I was lost in every way possible. I thought my life was over because a man didn't want me. But now I know it was just beginning." Thomas squeezed her hand. "I've loved you for a long time now," he admitted. "But I was afraid to say it. Afraid you deserved someone younger, with more to offer." Dorothy smiled. "You offered me kindness when I needed it most. You gave me a place to heal and grow. You listened to my ideas and helped make them real. That's worth more than anything." The next morning, they woke to find the farm covered in fresh snow. They walked together to the barn to check on the animals. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Dorothy said. looking out at the white fields. Thomas nodded. I've been thinking about the spring markets. Maybe we could add music? Get some local musicians to play? Dorothy grinned. That's a wonderful idea. And we could. As they talked and planned, a car pulled into the driveway. It was Dorothy's parents, come to visit for Christmas. Look at this place, her father said as he got out of the car. It's not at all what I expected. Her mother hugged Dorothy tightly. You look happy, dear. Really happy. Later that evening, as they all sat around the dinner table, Dorothy's father raised his glass in a toast. To Thomas, he said, for taking in our daughter that rainy night, and for bringing joy back into her life. Thomas blushed and looked at him. Dorothy. She brought the joy back into mine, he said. Dorothy's mother wiped away a tear. Who would have thought, she whispered, that the worst day of your life would lead you to the best place you could be? As snow fell gently outside the farmhouse windows, Thomas looked around at the warm kitchen filled with people and laughter. How different his life was now from that day he had driven home alone in the rain and spotted a sad young woman at the bus stop. Sometimes the kindest choices we make lead us to the greatest happiness, and sometimes the people who seem most lost are actually on their way to exactly where they need to be.